He lived in a penthouse with marble floors, wore designer suits, and dined at restaurants where a single dish cost more than most people's rent. For 7 years, everyone believed he was a self-made millionaire. But when the truth came out, it wasn't just shocking, it was catastrophic. In this story, you'll uncover the twisted path of a man who built an empire on deception, and the haunting downfall that followed when his lies could no longer hold. It started on a rainy Thursday in Newark, New Jersey. Daniel Frost stood in the middle of his cramped apartment, staring at the eviction notice tacked to his door. His clothes smelled faintly of stale cologne and desperation. At 31, he was broke, jobless, and barely hanging on to the illusion of a future. The sales job he once clung to like a lifeline had slipped through his fingers after a merger dissolved his entire department. Severance? None. Just a handshake and a bitter farewell. But Daniel wasn't just any man. He was observant, a quiet sponge who watched how others succeeded, not through hard work, but through perception. In his lowest moment, he made a decision. That would change his life. If the world only respected the rich, then he would become one, by any means necessary. He started small. First, he used what little he had left on a weekend rental of a Mercedes-Benz. Not to drive around town, but to take photos. He staged them carefully, pulling up in front of hotels he couldn't afford, posing with watches he borrowed and would later return, and crafting captions that oozed ambition and power. "Closed a 6-figure deal before breakfast," read one post. Another simply said, "When they sleep, I hustle." He gained 3,000 followers in a week. The attention fed something inside him, something dark and starved. But it also worked. An old college acquaintance saw his posts and offered to introduce him to a local investor. The meeting took place at a rooftop bar in Manhattan, where Daniel arrived in a tailored suit from a high-end thrift store and a fake Rolex that glimmered under the ambient lights. "Tell me about your latest venture," the investor asked. Daniel's mind raced. He hadn't prepared a pitch. But lies came easily now. "I've developed a platform that streamlines B2B logistics using AI analytics," he said with a calm confidence. It was pure fiction, but said with enough jargon to impress. The investor nodded. They scheduled a second meeting. That night, Daniel didn't go back to Newark. He slept in his car, parked beneath a bridge. It smelled of mildew and old fries, but he smiled anyway. He was becoming someone else, someone important. Over the next few months, he built an identity. He created a fake startup website with stock images and vague descriptions. He used editing software to fabricate business contracts and revenue reports. He bought Instagram followers, engaged with high-profile entrepreneurs, and started offering consulting services to impressionable young professionals who saw him as a mentor. To the world, Daniel Frost was now a self-made millionaire in the tech space. Consultant, investor, speaker. He posted daily stories from luxury hotels and champagne dinners, most of them staged or borrowed. He showed off new suits, always rented. He never stayed in one place too long, fearing the facade would crack, and yet his following grew. People began quoting him. Clients started paying him for advice. One even gave him a down payment for an app Daniel had no intention of building. He told himself it was temporary, that eventually he'd become legitimate. But the deeper he got, the harder it became to stop. The illusion had momentum, and momentum, Daniel realized, was more powerful than truth. What began as a survival instinct had evolved into a lifestyle, a dangerous game played on borrowed time. Every like, every comment, every handshake reinforced the delusion that he was building something real. But he wasn't. He was building a house of cards in a hurricane. He knew the fall would come. He just didn't know when or how devastating it would be. 6 months into the deception, Daniel Frost was no longer just a man with a story. He had become the story. He had more than 120,000 followers on Instagram, invitations to speak at digital marketing summits, and even an entry in a top 40 under 40 local entrepreneur feature. The irony: every accolade, every introduction was built on a lie. But perception had taken the wheel, and truth had been left gasping in the rearview mirror. He lived like a man possessed. Days began at 6 a.m. in hotel lobbies, where he drank free coffee meant for real guests. He'd linger, answering fake emails, on a laptop with a cracked screen, looking busy, powerful. His inbox was full of inquiries from brands, podcast hosts, wannabe investors, and Daniel replied to each with smooth confidence and fabricated metrics. He knew how to speak the language of wealth: understated arrogance, vague references to international clients, and casual mentions of deals that never happened. When asked to prove his revenue, he'd send doctored screenshots of bank transfers and blur out details, claiming NDAs prevented full disclosure. And it worked. One of his greatest cons came when he was invited to consult on a new cryptocurrency platform. The founders, two young finance bros from Brooklyn, were enamored by his social media presence. He spoke their language: tech, ambition, disruption. They handed him $50,000 as a retainer to build brand partnerships. In reality, Daniel spent the money renting a penthouse for 2 months and upgrading his wardrobe. He told himself he'd pay them back, eventually. But each new dollar became another thread in the tangled web of his deception. Then came the speaking engagements: TEDx, startup expos, influencer panels. Daniel knew how to command a stage. He told a false origin story with tears in his eyes and just enough self-deprecation to make it believable. The audience loved him. They clapped, cried, took selfies. After one talk, a young woman told him, "You changed my life." He nodded, smiled. "Glad to hear it," he said. But inside, he felt nothing. Behind closed doors, the panic began to fester. He was using 6 credit cards, rotating payments between them, constantly one mistake away from financial collapse. He had 2 burner phones for business deals and frequently changed hotels to avoid overdue bills. Once, when a receptionist demanded payment, he claimed identity theft and stormed out, leaving behind a suitcase of thrift store clothes and business cards with fake titles. He couldn't stop. Not now. The more success he faked, the more people wanted a piece of it. He began offering high-ticket wealth mindset courses online, modules filled with plagiarized content and motivational fluff. Desperate viewers paid $999 for a 10-part course that taught them nothing. He laughed at first, then grew numb. The final twist came when a venture capitalist from Boston expressed serious interest in one of Daniel's fake startups. They scheduled a due diligence meeting. Daniel panicked. His spreadsheets weren't consistent. The platform didn't exist. He faked a family emergency and fled the city for Miami, where he posted beach photos and claimed he was taking meetings with Latin American investors. The walls were closing in fast. Daniel's girlfriend, Elise, was beginning to ask questions. A successful fashion executive, she was used to luxury, but the inconsistencies in his stories, his constant travel, the lack of real colleagues, she noticed. Still, Daniel always had a charming explanation. She wanted to believe him, until one day she asked to meet his business partner. Daniel froze. He smiled. "Soon," he said, but soon never came. What do you think so far? Do you believe someone can live a complete lie for 7 years without being caught? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The beginning of the end wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve police sirens or news cameras. It was a simple email from Elise. "My firm wants to buy the property in Tribeca. They're requesting your financials for the deal." Daniel's heart stopped. For months, he had managed to keep Elise at a distance from his invented world. He explained his lack of a fixed address as a preference for nomadic entrepreneurship. He dismissed missed calls with tales of time, zone confusion. He used burner phones to avoid traceability and never let her inside any of his temporary residences. But now, the mask was cracking. He stalled. "I'll get everything to them by Friday," he replied. Then he locked himself in a luxury suite in Miami and stared at his screen for hours. Every possible escape route looked like a trap. He could try forging another set of financials, but this was corporate-level scrutiny, not the casual blind faith of social media. For the first time in years, Daniel felt real fear. Not the kind that buzzes quietly in the background, but the type that roars in your chest like a wildfire. He called an old friend who used to work in compliance and begged for help. The friend refused. "You need to come clean," he said. "This will ruin her." But Daniel wasn't ready to let go. Not of Elise, not of the lifestyle, not of the illusion he'd spun so carefully. Instead, he disappeared. No warning. He blocked her on all platforms and changed cities again, returning to New York under a new alias, Jonathan Fields. The name was a reference to a motivational speaker he admired, someone who'd once said, "People don't follow credentials, they follow charisma." Daniel took that to heart. But the Elise incident left a scar. It also left a trail. Unbeknownst to Daniel, Elise had grown suspicious months earlier. She had quietly hired a private investigator. The PI followed the threads Daniel didn't even realize he'd dropped. Old addresses, unpaid hotel bills, inconsistencies in registered businesses. What he found shocked her. Daniel Frost, the self-proclaimed tech mogul, was a fraud. His companies didn't exist. His degrees were fake. Even the Rolex he wore during their first date was counterfeit. Elise didn't confront him. She leaked everything to a journalist she knew at the New York Chronicle, a digital outlet hungry for sensational tech scandals. The story was titled, "The Fake Millionaire of Manhattan: How One Man Fooled the Elite." It went viral within hours. Daniel woke up to over 200 missed calls. His Instagram was flooded with comments, some furious, others mocking. Podcasts that once praised him now ridiculed him. Brands he had consulted for deleted any trace of their collaboration. Within 48 hours, he was trending on Twitter under the hashtag #ChasFraudFrost. The media frenzy only intensified. News crews parked outside. Hotels he once claimed to own. Former clients demanded refunds. Angry entrepreneurs accused him of theft. A class-action lawsuit was filed by attendees of his overpriced wealth courses. And Elise? She never said a word to him. But her silence was louder than any public statement. Daniel tried to control the damage. He issued a weak apology video, speaking in vague terms about misunderstandings and exaggerations. It was too late. His face was now synonymous with deception. Then came the authorities. Not long after the article broke, investigators began probing his finances, bank fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. The house of cards wasn't just collapsing, it was going up in flames. Daniel Frost had climbed too high on a ladder of lies, and now every rung was breaking beneath him. There was no refuge left. Daniel Frost sat alone in a rented studio apartment in Queens, the only place he could still afford. The walls were bare, save for a single crooked mirror that reflected a man he no longer recognized. The luxury suits were gone, sold for cash. His social media accounts, once bustling with artificial praise, had been shut down or taken over by trolls. The silence was deafening. His phone, once a constant source of dopamine, now only brought dread. Debt collectors, angry clients, ex-friends, and media outlets all wanted a piece of him. Every text felt like another nail in the coffin of the persona he had so carefully constructed. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. And worst of all, he didn't know who he was without the lie. The public backlash was vicious. The exposé had triggered a wave of digital justice. Former victims began coming forward. A teenager who took out a loan to join Daniel's online course, a veteran who invested his retirement fund in Daniel's fake app, a single mother who paid for one-on-one coaching only to be ghosted. The outrage wasn't just about fraud, it was about betrayal. He hadn't conned institutions or faceless corporations. He had deceived people who believed in him. News anchors dissected his downfall. Commentators labeled him a master manipulator and the poster child of millennial fraud. Memes of his apology videos circulated with captions like, "When your whole life is Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V." It was relentless. But beneath the media storm, the legal world began to close in. A subpoena arrived by mail. He was being charged with multiple counts: fraud, identity theft, false advertising, and operating without a business license. His accounts had been frozen. His assets, what little remained, were seized. A court date was set. Daniel hired a public defender. He couldn't afford anything else. At his arraignment, he stood in front of a judge, wearing a suit borrowed from a neighbor and shoes with cracked soles. Reporters filled the benches. Flashbulbs popped as he exited the courthouse in silence, shielding his face from the cameras. The same face that once graced magazine covers now stared out from mugshots and wanted for questioning flyers. But the worst blow came in private. His mother, who had once posted proudly about his entrepreneurial spirit, left him a voice message. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't call me again." Daniel dropped the phone, not from shock, but from shame. The people he loved, the ones he told himself he was doing all this for, were gone, not because of poverty, but because of the lies he'd wrapped around them like barbed wire. He tried to disappear, but the internet never forgets. Former followers still recognized him on the street. Some spat insults. Others asked for selfies, joking about being in the presence of a living scandal. He became a symbol of caution in business lectures and self-help books. A warning, a meme, a ghost. And yet, through the ashes, something strange began to grow. A cold clarity. Daniel realized he had spent 7 years building a life based on admiration from strangers, while the people who truly mattered were left behind. The luxury, the fame, the applause. It was all an illusion. What remained now was the truth. Raw, unfiltered, and unforgiving. But it was his. Thank you for staying with us until now. Your support means everything. And believe me, the most powerful twist is coming in the final chapter. Let's find out what truly remains after the fall. The courtroom was quiet. Daniel Frost stood at the defendant's table, flanked by a weary public defender. The judge read aloud the charges: fraud, misrepresentation, tax evasion. The words echoed like hammer blows against the shell of the man Daniel used to pretend to be. There was no jury, no dramatic objection. Just a sentence: 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory financial ethics rehabilitation. The prosecution lacked enough evidence for prison, but the damage was already done. Daniel didn't speak to reporters outside the courthouse. He had nothing left to say. In the months that followed, he disappeared from the public eye. The name, Daniel Frost, became synonymous with online scams, the epitome of illusion in the digital age. But beneath the internet's eternal ridicule, a man tried to rebuild, not a brand, not an image, but a life. He took a job cleaning office buildings at night. It paid little, but it was real. No photos, no hashtags, just floors to mop and trash, to empty. The work humbled him. For the first time in years, Daniel felt grounded. The echo of polished shoes in marbled lobbies had been replaced by the hiss of disinfectant on linoleum. It was honest. He kept his head down and spoke to no one. During the day, he volunteered at financial literacy workshops for young adults, part of his court-mandated service. At first they laughed when they recognized him. "Hey, aren't you that scam guy?" He nodded. "I am." Then he told them the truth. Every painful detail. The faked deals. The forged papers. The emptiness behind. The wealth. And they listened. Because now he wasn't speaking from a stage. He was speaking from the wreckage. Over time, some began to see the story not just as a cautionary tale, but as a wake-up call about the world we live in. A world that rewards appearance over authenticity, where curated lies are more profitable than quiet truths. Daniel started writing. Not a book, not a redemption arc, just pages in a journal. At night, he filled them with reflections. The shame, the guilt, the rare moments of peace. He didn't write for followers anymore. He wrote to remember who he was before the lies. One rainy evening, much like the day it all began, he passed a coffee shop window and saw a familiar face on a TV screen inside. His own. A new documentary was airing, The Fall of Frost. Fame, fraud, and the price of pretending. He stood there for a moment, watching the ghost of his former life flicker across the glass. Then he turned away. There was no going back. But there was a way forward. Daniel changed his name legally, left New York, and moved to a small town in upstate Pennsylvania. No more penthouses, no staged luxury. He rented a modest room above a mechanic's garage. The locals knew him only as Dan, the quiet guy who helped at the library and never missed a shift at the diner. In time, the noise faded. The internet found new scandals. The world moved on. And in the quiet that remained, Daniel found something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. His story wasn't one of glory or redemption. It was a sobering tale of how far a lie can go, and how long it can take to return to truth. He had lost everything: money, reputation, love. But in that loss, he uncovered the most painful, liberating lesson of all. If you spend your life pretending to be someone else one day, you'll forget who you really are. And that is the true cost of the illusion. Daniel's story forces us to ask, in a world obsessed with image, how much of our lives are real? Have you ever felt pressured to pretend? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and watch our next dark financial tale. Because sometimes, the lies we tell ourselves are the ones that destroy us.